my name is Josh, hands from School Industry Musings, and today I'm going to be talking about the fifth and final episode of Season 6 of Black Mirror, entitled Demon 79. And this follows a young woman by the name of Needa, who is essentially, when we first meet her, she's on her own in her flat. She has basically just lost her mother a year before this particular episode took place, and needless to say, she feels very alone and she feels very isolated, and she feels very particularly, isolated and alone when she's at work with racist co-workers and upper management giving her special kind of, picking orders in regards to where she eats, what she eats, all these other things. She's basically being subjected to all different kinds of racism. So one day when she's forced to take her lunch in the basement of the place where she works, she comes across a talisman where she unintentionally summons a demon, who tells her in the form of Boney M to kill 3 people within 3 days before midnight, or the nuclear apocalypse will happen. And this particular episode, it kind of falls in the same umbrella as Maisie Day, although I don't think I gave Maisie Day as much of a fair rap as I should have done. I feel like it was a good episode overall, and I feel like that episode did have at least some allusions to its twist, even though it wasn't talked about openly in dialogue or characters had any discussion about said twist. There were a lot of visual clues and a lot of, interesting little nods to it here and there, especially in the description of the episode. But in the case of Demon 79, this particular episode you could count as its own standalone thing, as it's not particularly tied to Black Mirror. It's tied to another subheading called the Red Mirror series. But again, it could go either way. Like, he could decide to do a spin-off series entitled Red Mirror, and that basically focuses on an entirely different topic. But even if you were to see it as a Black Mirror style episode, there are hints to say that there is something more going on outside of the central narrative between Needa and her demon friend trying to kill 3 people within 3 days. And one of the hints that this could be a Black Mirror episode is hinted at the point where she's at home watching television and she sees that there is a news article about a nuclear arms race against Russia, and Russia and America are essentially going to launch nukes at each other, and Britain and the rest of the world are pretty much going to be caught in the middle. And of course she gets depressed, and then she flicks over to a channel that's kind of like a top of the pop style thing where she sees Boney M, and that's where she gets the inspiration to, get these inspirations for what the demon is going to look like later on. And this episode was actually a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good episode. It was much more sadder than what was originally intended for what I actually saw of the episode, because the opening of the episode begins with the Art Garfunkel song Bright Eyes, which, if you know, is basically a song that was featured in the film Watership Down during a scene where one of the rabbits basically tries to find their brother who supposedly got shot. And that entire sequence was a beautifully animated sequence. But the whole entire point of this entire song actually gives you a little bit of a clue as to what it could potentially be about secretly within one of the lyrics. One of the lyrics basically says, "Is this a dream?" hinting that what is going on with Needa and the demon and her killing people within 3 days is supposed to be a hint that she might have had a mental breakdown. She might have cracked under the pressures of working at a very stressful job, but not only on top of that, she's had to deal with racism on top of that, and she's had to deal with a lot of other bullshit on top of all those other things, and she lives on her own. So clearly she doesn't have anyone to confide in or anyone to really kind of, unleash a lot of a sort of to sort of, offload onto for a lot of her therapy or anything like that. So you do often get the impression that she's bottled all this up, and this is basically a manifestation of her, having a mental breakdown. And that is a hint, but then there are also hints that this could be real. But then in many cases, I do feel like it is basically her having a mental break, and it's her basically, trying to justify all the things that are happening to her. And in many ways, it could have all started with the nuclear news bulletin, but this entire episode was actually just really a lot of fun to watch. I like seeing the dynamic between Needa and the demon. I felt like they had really good chemistry together, and I actually was quite happy to see that they actually had a lot of chemistry. And there is also a hint in the episode of isolation and loneliness, and how people basically feel isolated and alone, even people who feel like they have every reason to be happy. They're surrounded by friends, they're surrounded by loved ones. They do have that element of they do feel still alone, and they still feel isolated, and they feel like they're alone in themselves, even though technically they have a ton of people around them. You can still feel loneliness. But in the case of Needa, she literally is alone. She has no one else. Her mother passed away a year before the events of the episode taking place. So she feels a sense of the one person who she could confide in, or the one person that she felt safe around, is no longer around to protect her. So she feels like she has to go out on her own and deal with all sorts of bullshit in her day-to-day life. So she basically feels like without that support system, without that anchor, keeping her very close to the ground, she ends up, breaking, and this is what happens. She envisions a demon, and she, basically does all these terrible things, but she does it in the name of protecting people. Like one of the people that she decides to kill, who just happens to be walking by with his dog, turned out to be a guy who was in fact abusing his daughter, and when she kills him, she basically absolves this poor girl of the guilt of feeling like her father has actually, of actually feeling guilty about what her father is doing to her, and essentially she feels free and she feels cleansed, and of course Needa helped her get through that because she obviously killed him. Not to say that violence is the answer, but that was the way she handled it, and I actually really liked that. But there's another guy who she decides to kill, who apparently through the grapevine might have killed his wife, and there is even a hint that he might have done it because he ends up picking her up at this pub, and they go back to his apartment, and he basically confesses, and he even wants to die. He even said so himself, that he wants to die and he wants to be free, he wants to be with his wife. So she gives it to him out of euthanasia of sorts. So she is basically kind of like enacting this very kind of, she only kills people who deserves it. She's kind of like an English version of Dexter in many ways, and I really like that aspect of it. So it really was a great episode, and I really do feel like this entire episode is a commentary on loneliness, and also it does deal with a lot of very ugly truths about racism, in the sense that when Needa goes to work and she's having her lunch, people are talking about how her lunch smells, and how they feel like, wouldn't it be better if you have a ham sandwich or a ham and cheese sandwich if you're not all that keen on ham or anything like that. And that kind of bullshit really annoyed me and really, made me angry, because I feel like, really, you're picking at what she eats now. Like, who cares what she eats? She's enjoying her food. She is going to work. She only has one lunch break, and that's the only time when she can do it. And I think it's really unfair that she gets picked off. But then of course it's all to do with racism, and when people don't want to talk about racism directly, they kind of just try to find other things to talk about, to pick at in regards to that person's culture or their background. And I just think that's something that really is quite at the heart of what this makes this episode so interesting to me. It is funny, but there are moments where it can be quite dark and quite, to tackle very serious topics like racism, isolation, loneliness, and all the rest of it, and how society reacts and all the rest of it. And I do think it's a very intelligently written episode in that regard. It is funny. The performances were very fantastic. I think the actors who starred in this, both the actress who played Needa and the demon, I think they do. I think this is going to be a career-making role for the both of them. I hope they go on to do much better things, and I feel like they are going to. They're going to be stars. So I think it's one of those instances where it is going to be an interesting, a career-making performance. I think for the actress who plays Needa, especially, and I feel like it's very difficult to play a character who is pretty much going to go and kill someone, but you really do get this impression that she's working out of desperation. She essentially is mentally, I hold the theory that she has essentially had a mental breakdown, and she's basically using all these scenarios to kind of cope with the fact that she's essentially alone in the world, and the fact that she kind of has a demon who looks like Boney M. She actually admits to having a crush on him at one point, and he actually says, "Oh, in your subconscious, I must have, transformed myself into this thing because that's what I knew you'd feel comfortable me looking as." And I think that was actually a very interesting idea. So it's almost like she's projecting this visage onto him so that they can, so that she can feel more comfortable around him and they can talk more. But I think this was a very funny episode. It had great characters. Well, a great character dynamic between these two people, because I feel like the other characters were just racist arseholes, and not very nice people. So I feel like the two central characters were actually the glue that held this episode together for me. And it is actually a very intelligent episode. It has a lot of very serious subject matter about politics, about racism, and about, the changing tide of what happened in the 70s and how things were changing for a lot of people of all different backgrounds, not just cultural backgrounds or race. It was more to do with, all sorts of other things like gender, sexual orientation, and other things as well. So there was a lot of things going on at that time, but this particular episode does focus on political tensions. It does reference the National Front. The National Front is actually a very big part of the story, and the racial conflict that kind of spawns the racism in the episode as well. It's the central organisation that spawns a lot of the racism in this episode. But I do think it's a very intelligent episode overall. I do feel like it was very, very intelligently done, and I feel like Charlie Brooker did a very good job with this one. As to whether it's actually a Charlie Brooker episode, you could a Black Mirror episode, you could go either or. I personally like to think of it as still a Black Mirror episode, even though technically it is meant to be under the banner of a Red Mirror type film or Red Mirror type episode. I do think it's a very intelligent episode. I feel like, in regards to doing the supernatural thing, I feel like this one actually did it a little bit. I do think both Maisie Day and Team 79 did a really good job in that front. And I will say overall that this particular season has been the most experimental out of all the... I am going to give it a thumbs up, by the way. It is a great episode. It's very entertaining. It's very fun. I like the use of Bright Eyes at the very start, because it does often... That song is often, targeted as being kind of like a very sad, melancholic song about loss and about moving on and dealing with, losses and trying to move forward after the tragedy of this event, because there is a hint of sadness in the song, obviously, with the line, how can some eyes that shine so brightly suddenly burn so pale? And that really kind of, adds the idea that sometimes death can happen at any time to anyone, and that's something that you've got to deal with as a person when you are grieving. You've got to bear in mind that person is gone, but then you've also got to bear in mind that they're always with you and you're never alone, and that's something that really kind of, it adds another layer of tragedy. But then there's also that element of hope that you will see them again one day, that you will see them in one form or another, and it's just very beautiful. And also Bright Eyes for me is literally one of the top 10 songs that I think makes me cry whenever I hear it. When I heard it in the episode, I found it very difficult to keep it together. Like, it's such a beautiful song, and the fact that Charlie Brooker played it all the way through that montage, it kind of made me think, oh, come on, Charlie, just cut it off somewhere, because I don't think I can hold it together. But yeah, I love that song. It's one of the songs that really I do get emotional at. So yeah, I really enjoyed this episode overall. It was funny. I like the fact that the demon character, I've forgotten his name, yeah, I think he was one of those characters. I really like the moment where he goes, there was a moment where he's like going, oh, kill that person. They drowned a cat in a bathtub or something like that, or he says, oh, kill that person. He's not a very nice person, or oh, kill that person. There's no witnesses and things like that. So you really do get this impression that there are moments of comedy where he is basically just doing whatever he can to basically save his job and not, go under the thumb of any other hierarchy demons or anything like that. So there is an element of humour in it. But what I really like about the episode is it is just really a lot of fun. It is, an interesting, take on something else. It's very Black Mirror, and it's not very Black Mirror in its presentation, but I do feel like it's much more, a different thing. And if it does decide to be the first starting off point for a much more horror driven Charlie Brooker series, I wouldn't mind that. Like, that's a very interesting way. Excuse me, I do beg your pardon. If it does start off a new line of anthology shows or a new serial, I do think it's going to be an interesting point to go off of, and I do think it's going to be an interesting introduction to that world. But if it is just a Black Mirror episode, like a regular old Black Mirror episode, it's fine as well. Again, this season is a lot more experimental than the others. I feel like they're definitely more focusing on other genres and different ways of telling a story as opposed to focusing on the technology angle. And some people might like that. Other people might say, oh, Charlie Brooker's run out of ideas at this point. But I'm somewhere in between. I feel like, yes, this season was good, But I think the next season should be where it ends if Charlie Brooker genuinely feels like he's running out of ideas. Because even though I like the fact that he's going in a different direction this time round, I feel like it's kind of like if Inside Number Nine just started including all sorts of different rules. Imagine if it wasn't set in one location inside Number Nine. Imagine if you went all over the place, and to a certain degree you do in the episode of Inside Number Nine, Kid slash Napped, where they do the split screen thing. But to me, I still think that still holds on to the essence of what, the Inside Number 9 is supposed to be. Is the action is still focused in on or centered around that Number 9 address where the kidnapping has happened and the ransom is taking place. You really do get the impression that it still is a Number 9 episode, even though it does stray from a lot of the rules of Inside Number 9. So if Charlie Brooker decides to work under those same parameters, then maybe he could still make 2 more seasons or maybe 1 more season out of this. But I think if this is him, just declaring that, I've run out of ideas, I think the next season after this one should be the very last one, because I feel like if he's running out of ideas, he shouldn't be pressured to do any more, and he shouldn't feel like, oh, I'm just doing this out of obligation, because this is what it feels like. It felt like he added this just so he can fill the slot of, oh, we need 6 episodes. And that's not a bad thing, because it still was a good episode. But I feel like if he is ready to end Black Mirror, I think this is a good time as any, or the next season is a good time as any to actually end the show if he doesn't feel like he can do it anymore. But yeah, I want to know what you think. Do you think this was a good episode? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, comment below and let me know. And if you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And one more question before I leave. What do you think about the opinion of Charlie Brooker keeping going with this particular series? Do you think he should keep going at least 1 more season, or do you think this is an appropriate time to end it? Like, end it while we're on a high? And what do you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, comment below, let me know. And it's been Josh with Whimsical and Interesting Musings. I hope you're all having a very good day. Take care. Bye for now.